So Ilana has been traveling the world studying primates on a scholarship until COVID hit. She was in Scotland before coming back home to Montreal. She's completed an undergraduate degree thesis at Rice University. I met Ilana through mutual friends. We had a similar group. Ilana is motivated, creative, and an advocate for those to share their voice. I also share these qualities and would love to get to know a bit more about her work and her life. So please, can you help me welcome Ilana?
Thanks, that's such a nice intro.
So yeah, maybe we could talk a bit about what you'd been doing up until COVID. So what were you doing exactly, and how far were you into kind of your studies and your scholarship before you had to make a decision to come back?
The scholarship that I received, or the fellowship rather, was basically for a year of travel. So they asked for a proposal about what kind of things I wanted to learn about, and it's super open. My proposal was all about how I am existentially confused by being a human and had this interest in primatology since I saw videos of Coco the gorilla, who's that gorilla who did sign language. And I just became really obsessed with the idea that humans are apes and what does that mean for my existence in the world. So I crafted this whole proposal around that and told them that I wanted to go see apes in the wild, which I'd never done before, and go to sanctuaries and stuff like that. And I got this grant basically. So I left Montreal in the end of July, beginning of August of 2019. And then I went to Indonesia and saw orangutans there and went to a little monkey research project in Bali. And then I had another existential crisis, which is a pattern for me, while I was in Bali, and really felt like I needed to connect with people for a while instead of just being in the science world. And so I went to India and went to a couple conferences in India about localization and community living. And I've also been very interested, kind of related to the primatology, I'm very interested in alternative lifestyles and eco-villages, that kind of thing, collective living, and just thinking about, particularly through the lens of primatology, how humans can exist in other ways. We're doing this one thing right now and it's not working that well. And so I'm interested in thinking about how else we can exist together, particularly through this lens of species that are really similar to us. So I went to India. I was there for 2 months and visited some eco-villages, worked on some farms, hiked in the Himalayas, and then went to Thailand and did a month-long course in spiritual ecology, which was really cool. So was just in the north of Thailand and spending a lot of time meditating in forests, again, living in these kind of communities. And then I went to Australia. And there were little scattered trips between major countries, but these were kind of the big places that I was going. So I went to Australia and did a bunch of climate activism type stuff. So in forests that they were logging, setting up camps and trying to protect those forests. And then more conferences with other activists who were interested in kind of the same things. And then I went to Scotland to kind of redirect myself back onto the original plan, which was to do primatology. So I had an internship at the Edinburgh Zoo, and I was like, wow, I'm so excited to live in an apartment in Scotland and do this internship and have a stable life. How amazing this will be after moving around so much for 7 months. And then COVID hit 2 weeks into being in Scotland. I got back to Montreal on March 15th.
How far in were you into your whole scholarship thing?
I was about 7.5 months in. I was supposed to be traveling until the beginning of August of 2020. So yeah, I was about 3/4.
And how was that decision you were in Scotland? I read one of your little kind of blog post things about it. You were kind of saying, yeah, you were finally in the place where, okay, I'm going to settle down in Scotland for a bit and, having an apartment and doing a routine and all this. And then so what was that shift like, or how did you come to the decision, okay, I've got to go back to Montreal and kind of leave this?
I feel like everyone had a really intense experience of March. For me, it literally changed overnight. So I went to bed on a Thursday thinking I think it's going to be fine. I think it's going to be fine and I'm going to be able to stay. And I woke up to the news on Friday morning and was like, oh no, it's not fine. So it was really like a crazy, intense turnaround. In the same morning, pretty much, my internship was canceled. Trump announced that flights from the UK were going to be stopped. So it was kind of it all changed in like one day, which was intensely overwhelming. Yeah, I think I was in shock for a little while, even after getting back home, of just not even, for everyone, right? Everything changed so quickly in such a short period of time.
And how has your COVID experience been overall? Have you like started any new sort of habits or hobbies or stuff you brought into like your daily life, or awakenings? Did you go through another kind of existential crisis maybe? I know I
go
felt like
through
I
one
kind of
every
did.
week, man, every week. But I came back to Montreal and started living with my parents, which is hard as a thing to do in your life. So I kind of had to find things that I could do for myself, that I could do within the confines of my room, because I didn't feel like I had that much space to occupy. I don't know if you feel this way or if other people feel this way, but I feel like at my parents' house, it's like I don't like doing things out in the open. Like I don't want my parents to ask me questions about what I'm doing. So I feel like I just completely retreated into this one room, which was intense after having like the entire world at my disposal, kind of. To go from like buying international flights the day before they fly to I exist in one room was like a big shift. Yeah, I did a lot of like nesting because I hadn't been able to like really exist in one place for longer than 3 weeks up until that point. I did a lot of like DIY projects. I made this little instrument stand for my guitars and my ukuleles. Yeah, I like changed the light fixture. Like I was really into like home improvement for a while. That was like my first phase of COVID. And then, yeah, I got really into doing kind of like artistic practices at home. Yeah, I don't know if you have a planned segue for junk drawer, but
Yeah,
but
I mean,
that was
maybe,
big for me.
yeah, could you talk a bit more about that?
It started from an Instagram post, actually, where I posted something being like, I need someone to hold me accountable to like making art because I won't do it if no one is looking. And my friend from high school, Ali Byers, responded and was like, I feel the same way, let's talk. And so we had kind of a meeting. I guess it started off as a chat, but became a meeting about what we wanted to do and this project that we wanted to start. And the real kind of birth of the project was that we both don't really consider ourselves like artists per se, capital A artists, but derive a lot of joy and fulfillment from having consistent art practices in our life. So just like writing every so often or painting every so often, and not even about the fact that you're producing anything, but just like the feeling of creating is really therapeutic for me. So yeah, we wanted a way to kind of hold each other accountable to creating without worrying about what the product was going to be. And we were like, this is a great idea. Let's open it up to other people. We kind of started this little, it's like a newsletter, but it's also like a little art collective where we encourage people to make bad art or make art even if they've never tried making art before, or make art in a medium that they're not used to. The name came from like whatever you have in your junk drawer, like whatever thing is like lying around, just like send it to us, have a place for it to go, and like have this outlet that is like completely non-judgmental to put whatever you want to put. So we publish everything that is submitted to us. We don't curate it at all. And it's been like a really satisfying project to work on.
Like you, I don't consider myself an artist, capital A, but it is very, therapeutic to do art. And even my whole T1K stuff has been trying to get other people to just share stuff too, that they don't consider themselves necessarily an expert in something, but just explore that for themselves. How has that been going so far? Like, how do you keep the project going, and what's the role like of social media in it? You mentioned it actually started through just like an Instagram post, but has that been a big part of it? How social media and that interaction works?
We had a lot of momentum at the beginning. Ali and I were like so into it. We were hosting events on Zoom. We were publishing every 2 weeks. Like we were really going for it because we had so much time on our hands because we were both just like sitting in our rooms during quarantine. And it started to slow down a little bit right around the time that the Black Lives Matter stuff kind of erupted on Instagram, because Instagram was like something that we were using a lot as a tool for the collective. And so we had to get reflective and think about, okay, like, do we still feel comfortable using this platform in this way? Do we still want to publish as two white girls? Like, do people need two white girls publishing art right now? Is that the voice that we're trying to uphold? Took a long pause, and also the world was starting to pick back up a little, so we took a long pause and kind of had some chats about that and decided to financially support Black like creative ecosystems, so creative funds to support Black artists, to kind of feel like we're not just publishing the voices of us and our white friends, but we're also making tangible reparations in that process also, and using the platform to encourage other people to make those reparations. So that was a big conversation that we had. And then another conversation that we had was also like, okay, we're both trying to find jobs and we don't necessarily have as much time to dedicate to it. So it's morphed a lot recently, and it's become kind of more of a once a month publication now. And we're trying to like pick up the events again and to get our momentum back. But it's definitely like a slower burn than it was before. I feel like we were really like on fire at the beginning, and now we're kind of trying to find a way to make it more sustainable. But we both like really care about the project so much, and both want to pursue lines of work that revolve around like community building. And so it's been a really useful tool also just for kind of like learning the way that that is done and the responsibilities that you have. Yeah, so that's kind of a walk around way of answering like the social media role.
Well, yeah, it was interesting during that time. I remember where, the whole Black Lives Matter and a lot of advocacy kind of and activism popping up, especially on Instagram. And yeah, it was a great time to get learned in that, but also to know how to navigate it. I always say this, but everyone has a voice. Everyone's like welcome to like my events and all this type of stuff. But yeah, how do you do that in like a meaningful way? You say everyone's voice matters, but then how do you actually like put that into practice? I feel like it's a bit tricky. How do you think we can provide like a voice for everyone? Like, I think that your thing too, you kind of share that idea of giving people a voice and like an outlet. Maybe it's not really an answerable question, but like how do you, I don't know.
It's a big question. So I guess in my life, this is like a principle I hold very dear, making sure everyone I come into contact with feels like safe and comfortable around me. So I do a lot of work on myself to try and make that be the case. And in like my volunteering work also, I tend to always gravitate towards things that are around building safe spaces for people. I have had the experience of looking around my friend circles, particularly in Montreal. I felt this less in Houston, where I went to university. But yeah, in Montreal, a lot of my friends are white and are from NDG, And Ali, whose mother's place is on the same street as my parents' place, funnily enough. So we're both kind of like coming from this very similar circle. And we were like, okay, well, we're inviting all of our friends to participate. And largely our friends who are participating are white. And so do we target our friends of color? And it's like, well, that doesn't really feel right. Like we don't want to tokenize people at all. And we were like, okay, well, we can stop doing our publication, or we can try to use what we do have and what we have been building to make an impact in other people's lives. And we have opened up the leadership of Junk Drawer. We haven't had anyone come forward, but we were like, if you have an opinion on how this should be run, like it's for the community, like we're trying to respond to the needs of our immediate community. And so like if someone came forward and was like, do this better, we'd be like, yeah, let's do that better. Like, you know what I mean? It's about like putting aside your ego and putting aside this obsession with like, well, we're the founders of Junk Drawer and we decide the vision, and just being like, if our vision isn't actually serving the people that we want to serve, then that means we have to adjust our vision. I think it's an ego thing, a lot of it. I think people really like being in charge.
Yeah, and maybe you could talk more about creating that safe space. Like I've been trying or wanting to do that as well, just like in my events and in everything I do, because I think if people feel safe, they're more willing to open up, and you can have like a better kind of discussion and get more out of it for everyone. So what are some of the things that you do to do that or create that space?
mean, again, like it's hard, you know, it's not like there's a step-by-step guide or anything. Or maybe there is, and I should read it. But I think it's just about like really listening. If people are not engaging with something, or if people have a criticism of something, like really listening and really absorbing that, and like not just plowing forward with your plan and kind of shoving people off to the sides, you know? It's hard. It's not like there's like tangible, like, yeah, again, it's like hard to say, do these 5 things and your event is guaranteed to be inclusive and safe. But I think if you're not reaching a diverse audience, consider why. Like, is it that your friends are all white? Okay, like maybe like diversify your circles a little bit. Maybe like try to step outside your comfort zone or occupy different spaces. Or like, is it because your event is exclusive in some way? Is there like some accessibility barrier? Are you not disseminating your information in a way that's accessible to other people? I mean, it also really depends on like what your goals are, you know? Like Junk Drawer was never intended to be a huge conglomerate. It was really just, this is a thing that we're doing for each other to keep each other accountable with our art practice, and maybe other people would like to join. On the one hand, we're trying to keep it as inclusive as possible. On the other hand, it's like we're not trying to fulfill a giant need in a lot of different communities. It was really just kind of a small like baby bird of a project. All of this is a tangled mess in my brain. And maybe sometimes the answer is just like set everything up and let someone else be the leader, let someone else be the front person, you know? Like maybe as a white person, the best thing you can do with your privilege is just to like put all the blocks in place to let someone who doesn't have the resources to put those things in place step in and take charge. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things to consider. I don't think anyone is perfect. I'm certainly not perfect and make a lot of mistakes, and probably will continue to make a lot of mistakes. And I hope that I have people in my life who will call me out on them and help me to be better and be more inclusive and be more welcoming and make my spaces more safe.
Yeah, and I think that is something that at least I've seen happening more and changing more, which I like to see, is just being open to making mistakes and taking criticism and going with it like in stride, and just being like, yeah, okay, I was wrong and I accept it. Like it really is about what you said, like the whole ego thing, like not letting your ego get in the way, right? It's not a thing that's personal either, right? Like they're not attacking you, they're saying, okay, this is my perspective. And if we can kind of get all those perspectives and voices heard and have their voice, then I think that's the best we can do.
I think it's important to keep in mind that it's just not about me or you or like any individual white person. Like it's just not about us. So I don't know why we get so frustrated or upset. It's so much bigger, and it would be so narrow-minded of me to fuss excessively over like the politics of my tiny community than to like divert that energy that I could spend being paranoid that I'm not doing everything perfectly into actually supporting people and going to protests when that's a thing that people can do, and financially supporting communities that I care about. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of energy gets wasted trying to get everything right before you even take a step.
I talked to someone else too on the podcast. They were talking about experimenting, and just a lot of people, like what you said, just thinking beforehand, oh, this might happen, this, is making it perfect. But you just got to kind of take a step and just go for it, and then things will follow. And it'll never be perfect anyways. You just got to make that step. I wanted to shift, maybe you mentioned it briefly at the start. You were traveling around, visiting all these places, and you mentioned a retreat somewhere in India, maybe, where you practice meditation in like the forest in Thailand. That's one thing I've just gotten more into: spiritual practice, meditation, reading a lot more of that stuff too. What has your experience been like with meditation, and do you still do it regularly, or how do you have it in your life?
I definitely don't do it as regularly. I would like to, but I think it's a lot easier to do when you're surrounded by people who have that practice and you just kind of like get swept up in it. But again, like sitting in my parents' house and like meditating in my childhood bedroom was a very weird thing to do for me. I didn't really ever meditate before traveling. I had done yoga for several years, and so that's similar vein, I guess, but not to the degree that I did while I was traveling. And I think a lot of it just, again, came around from being with people who have that practice. Like I was in all these kind of hippie conference type spaces, and there would be like breathwork workshops or like meditation sessions in the morning, or in the course that I was doing in Thailand, there was Qigong, which is like a movement practice kind of similar to Tai Chi that was conducted every morning. So there was like a lot of opportunity to learn from that. I'm still figuring out what my place is in all of it or what role I want it to play in my life. I'm very conscious of not taking it lightly. Like I know I don't want to just randomly appropriate spiritual practices from cultures that I know nothing about and use them as if they are mine. I feel like it would do me good to meditate more these days, even outside of like any other kind of spirituality, just like sitting and like emptying my brain for 15 minutes. I feel like allows you to have a lot more level-headedness in the day.
Yeah, and those other practices that you mentioned, when you were doing yoga, like what was the role it had in your life? Like, is it important for you to have this spiritual practice too and like a good balance of your body and your mind?
I mean, I did yoga all throughout high school and it was kind of not so much exercise, but yeah, I guess kind of a meditative practice in that it was like after my busy day at Royal West Academy, I would like go and like stretch and just like decompress a little bit. And so it held that place in my life for a long time. And then I kind of fell off when I went to university and I've been kind of like bringing it back. I have been doing yoga more this summer than I have in a while. I was working at a farm/ecotourism center this summer that had a yoga studio. That was amazing. I think it has become more important to me to have these kind of meditative spiritual things in my life just because I feel like otherwise I can have really intense blinders on, like when I'm in the city and I feel like all my problems are so big and they're just not. And it was easier to feel like I had that open perspective when I was traveling, but it becomes harder, especially being back in the city where I grew up. I don't know why, but I feel so preoccupied here with things that were concerning to me when I was a teenager. It all just floods my brain back and I'm like, this doesn't matter, but it's something about the environment. So yeah, it's important for me to kind of have that space in my brain.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of meaning in the environment, right? Like you walk by where you did this when you were a kid or like your high school. I feel that same sense too sometimes. And yeah, that spiritual practice at least has helped me a lot with a lot of those things. What that experience was like for you to doing that, like you said, it was like in a forest or in the woods in like Thailand.
Yeah.
That was probably pretty amazing. Like
it was intense. I come from a home that is very rational and scientific. Both of my parents are very obsessed with the facts. And so I've been in this process of learning to put that voice aside and just be like, okay, this is what I'm experiencing right now. These are the things that these people are telling me. I'm going to give myself to that fully and leave aside the critical voice right now. Like I don't actually have to criticize everything as soon as it's presented to me. I can experience it first and then decide how I want to incorporate it into my life or not. Yeah, I really was like, okay, putting that voice aside, I'm just going to do this spiritual ecology course in the wilds of northern Thailand. It was intense. I mean, I didn't experience in the forest where I was there for 3 days and 3 nights without food, just with water. And I was alone. And I had no book and I had nothing really except a sleeping bag and a lighter and water and my clothes. That was pretty much it. And a whistle in case of emergency. And your brain really does weird shit. It was a really intense experience. It's like very hard to put into words. But I think really cutting everything out gave me the ability to kind of slowly add things back into my life. Like I went to a city very soon after I had that 3-day, 3-night experience in the woods and was so overwhelmed. I felt so intensely overstimulated. The sounds felt so loud. I was like not emotionally prepared for it at all. And I was like, oh, okay, this is an interesting reaction to this. Maybe I don't want to live on a busy street in the future. You know, if this is what my brain's like natural reaction to city stimulation is, maybe that's something that I want to not experience all the time. It just sits there, you know, all that stimulation, it just kind of builds up in you and fills you up to the eyebrows. And then you have 3 inches left of room in your brain to experience other things, but you're so clogged almost with city sounds and seeing people and screens and everything. I'm not someone who thinks that we need to eliminate all screens in all cities forever because they're evil, but I do think I notice a huge difference especially living this summer pretty much full time on this ecotourism center farm market garden project, I just felt so much more clear headed, and I felt like I could think a little bit more and I had more motivation. And then I would come back to the city and I would just feel like so heavy and bogged down. So that's something I think that I took away from that experience for sure.
I feel like that too this was the first summer, at least in a while for me, where I didn't kind of leave the city for an extended amount of time, and I did feel kind of that build up. Yeah, you kind of absorb the stimulus, heightens kind of your stress levels just by having all these things. Do you notice it the most, or I would when I came back from my cottage? Let's say I was there an extended amount of time and you come back to the city, you really notice all these like noises and all the stimulus. So I've been not having been able to like leave the city for an extended amount of time, though I still found in me that need or that want to like leave and get some sort of break from it and be surrounded by nature, whether it's going down to the river or going to another friend's cottage or going biking outside of the city or whatever. Try to get that back, because it does help me to kind of like clear your head and just kind of therapeutic, I think.
Definitely.
Building off something you said too earlier of having that critical mindset, that's something I've noticed myself going through a lot too. A lot of the spiritual practice and even meditation, like watching your thoughts and not being that like critical voice or being like so rational has helped too. And I wondered how much of that is kind of built or fed by education. You learn kind of that ability to look at everything critically and have like an analytical mind and like analytical mindset, which can serve you in some ways, but it doesn't really serve you in another realm of like, okay, I'm feeling this way. There's no real reason or whatever it is. Like you just got to kind of let it be, and maybe later you'll come back and you say, okay, let me analyze this a bit more if this is happening a lot of the time.
Critical thinking is a tool or a skill, I guess, that's advertised at schools. You know, when they're listing all the things that you learn in a program, they'll put critical thinking on there as like a thing to desire. And it is, you know, critical thinking is great. It's very useful, especially with so much conflicting information from so many different sources. It's a really important tool. But what I think my teachings drilled maybe a little bit too intensely into me is that everything is up for critical thinking. Everything is available to be critically thought through by me and my own baggage and my own background. That's just not true. I shouldn't be going into wherever I am, some random community in Indonesia, and critically thinking through their community practices. Like, that's not for me to do. And so I think education is also a topic that came up a lot in these conferences that I was going to, and met a lot of people who are anti-school or who are raising their children kind of in these eco-villages and doing homeschooling / being taught by random adults in the community. And I'm really not sure where exactly I lie with respect to that question. It's easy to idealize the idea of not sending children to school and just having them learn from the world, but you also want to like set people up to be able to succeed in a conventional way if that's what they want. So education is another thing that I've been thinking about a lot, especially as a person who has always wanted to have children. I'm like, okay, I don't even know what the world is going to look like in 10 years. Like, I don't know what is going on. I don't know what kind of education is going to serve people in the future. You know, if this was a thing that came up a lot at these conferences, is the things that people are being taught are just not serving them and are not helping them become well-adjusted adults. And so what's the point?
I definitely felt like that because I graduated not this spring, but a year ago. After being in education and in schools for 20 years, having all these other things cropping up that had nothing to do with school or nothing that was touched on in education. What were all those things serving me? And I think that's a good question to ask too, of education in general, right? If it's not giving people kind of the tools to use outside of the confines of a school, then I think there's less value in it.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what were some of the things that were meaningful to people in these eco villages and stuff if they're saying like, we're anti-school or whatever? Like, what was important to them?
I had a conversation, this man who I met at a conference who, had chosen not to send his daughter to school. And it was so interesting to me because him and his wife had both gone to, this was in India, they'd both gone to big American universities, like the fancy ones. And he had worked on Wall Street, the whole 9 yards. And then they decided not to send their daughter to school. And I was like, I'm so baffled by the huge reversal. And he was like, yeah, well, I'm just gonna give her the opportunity to do whatever she wants. If she is interested in animals, she can go shadow a vet. And if she's interested in baking, she can go shadow a baker, just letting her learn from these mentors in whatever appealed to her. And I think that was such an interesting kind of system that really spoke to me. Yeah, it was very much letting this teenager direct what she wanted to learn. And my rebuttal was like, yeah, but like, what if she wants to go to university? You had all these opportunities. Don't you want to provide these opportunities for your daughter? And he was like, she's not going to resent me for letting her learn whatever she wants to learn. And if she decides she wants to go to university, she can go and take the catch-up courses and take the exams, and I bet she'll be way better off and way ahead of her peers because of all the independent learning. That was a really interesting framing of it, because I think I have this idea that my children would resent me for not letting them do the normal thing, and forcing them to do this weird hippie lifestyle that has become kind of what I want to do. And children hate their parents for sending them to normal school too. To really answer your question, it's a lot of practical skills and a lot of mentorship. And again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about diversifying voices. If you're diversifying the voices that are speaking to your children, instead of having it be this one teacher who teaches the same curriculum as everywhere else, instead of these people who live in the same environment as you and can teach you specific local knowledge and can teach you relevant skills to where you are and what you're interested in. Theoretically, it's very appealing.
Yeah, and I think there's also, a distinction. I think I've been saying education in general, but I really mean the education system, because you're always learning no matter what you're doing. If you choose to pursue cooking or you choose to pursue painting, you're going to be learning through that process. It's just not a conventional route of the education system. Yeah, that's a good distinction to make. I think universities in general, or higher education, kind of started around the basics of having a mentor, just someone who could kind of guide you in the ways of what they know more about. And that idea that I think you're always learning, and learning within a school is kind of a very limited confines and a limited set of skills and tools that are just a part of life, maybe not even depending on how you're living. So I wanted to kind of segue into talking more about studying primates and the parallels we can see with them, and what if we realize we're kind of we are a part of them. And at least for me, I see parallels with nature in general and the environment. We're very out of touch with it and out of sync, that I believe it's part of why we're able to just destroy and do all these big things on a local and global scale that destroy nature and the environment and don't really have a respect for it. So what was kind of your lens getting into studying primates? And then more broadly, how do you see the parallels with humans and primates, and also humans with just nature in general?
I got interested in primatology largely because of that similarity. The idea that a species that is so similar to us is living completely differently and so much more harmoniously with nature. Obviously, I don't want to oversimplify and say that everything in nature is perfect and every system works perfectly and nothing bad ever happens, because I think that's also a camp that some people can walk a little bit too far into when they're talking about humans versus nature. But I'm just really into the idea of existing within nature instead of as separate to it, knowing more about the biology of a human, and that includes the evolutionary journey that we shared with chimpanzees, and it involves responding to other humans and responding to society with that understanding of okay, we're all animals. What animal instinct is driving my action right now? Maybe I am being mean right now because I'm hungry. And it's as simple as that. And it's oh, I'm not just a thinking, floating brain. I have a body that is animal, that comes from other animals, and that I share body parts, with other animals. And that knowledge really maybe internalizing the fact that you're an animal is like a very difficult thing to do because it makes you feel very unimportant, but it's also very liberating because it just nothing matters. You know, you're just like, I'm just a little hairless ape. Not even. I'm a little kind of hairy ape on this planet, and that's it. That's all there is to it at the end of the day. It's kind of both a biology, like ecology, environmental interest, and also a philosophical interest in that I'm trying to understand why we're doing things this way. Like, how did we get here? Like, what like animal instincts have driven our society to be this way? It's not like this is the only way it could have gone in my belief system. It's not that this is a divine design. It's that, yeah, we evolved into these weird creatures who have now completely severed any evolutionary journey we ever experienced. And we're like, no, we are the final animal. We are the evolved form. It gives you an inflated sense of ego and also an inflated sense of like pressure. I have to have an impact. I have to be somebody. But like chimps don't have to be somebody. So why do we have to be somebody?
So what do you think we can learn from these species, or is it just that idea of we can just be, or is there also a disconnect between us and the environment these days, and that maybe is part of the problem? We did evolve for most of our time, right? Living solely in the environment and with nature as being a big part of it, and having that tie like severed, I think is problematic in some sense. Yeah, I don't know. I guess just what can we learn from them? And do you think there needs to be a greater, interaction or understanding of our relationship with nature?
A lot of what my revelations or learnings or whatever when I was traveling were about relationship to land and relationship to the people around you. And those two things, broad as they are, can like really just completely shift everything else. In my home in Montreal, don't feel like I have a relationship to the land that I'm on. It's not my land. I don't know any of my neighbors on the street that I live on for like 18 years. And that's weird. And it's scary. And it's isolating. And it's alienating. And it just contributes to me feeling overwhelmed and disconnected and unsatisfied. And it's so, so different to be in a community that has a relationship to the land it's on, whether they are the original stewards of that land or they've been working on it for a long time or they are growing their own food on it, and have a relationship to the people around them, like sharing. I don't know, a lot of my interests revolve around food. Really feel like you could change the entire world if you change the way that people related to food, because it's like you grow it on land that you have a relationship with, you share it with people that you have a relationship with, and it keeps you connected to your body. You're feeding yourself, you're connected to what you're putting in your body in your own kind of animal form. Yeah, it's all about connection and community. That's what is so jarring to me now after having been abroad and having lived in these different spaces. Being in the city is like, I'm just like in my little brick box with no connection to anything.
Yeah, I really like those ideas, and I can relate to that too. It is crazy. Like, okay, I don't know who lives next to me. It seems so out of touch. How is there not even that? This was the first summer I was in the city, so it did have a greater connection, at least with like my backyard and stuff. I was kind of tending the garden and go out there every day and just look at it and kind of take it in and appreciate it. And I found that kind of really nice and something I'd never really done in the past, because I'd always leave in the summer. I definitely feel that need for connection too, with not only the land, but like the people around. Yeah, it is interesting to hear you talk about that and seeing that in the communities you visited, and then also even getting back to like the stuff you studied, like primatology, right? They live in these kind of like social and small groups, and they're getting everything from the land. We'd always kind of been like that, and then it's only very recently where we're living in cities and living in these communities that are very squared off and isolated. So just kind of wrapping this up and looking forward is something I try to do, and try not to do too much, but how do you approach the future generally, and are you optimistic or hopeful, or what is your lens on the future?
I try not to look too far forward because it stresses me out. I think definitely I've been thinking about how I can make the spaces that I'm in more like the spaces that I experienced that made me feel good when I was traveling. For me right now, that involves doing like community work and kind of like trying to host like workshops and build events and like continuing to work on Junk Drawer and just trying to create connection between people and create spaces where people feel heard and feel like they are not the only thing in the world, both for everyone else's sake and for those people's sake. Looking forward, I'm just like trying to make sure people feel okay. I am a very nurturing and caring person by nature. I would love to be rioting and getting angry, but it just is not where my heart goes. And instead, I have tried to devote a lot of energy towards making spaces for those people to come back to. I phrase it as baking bread for the activists. I just want to support people in fighting their fights and kind of devote all of my energy to that and to sowing the seeds for new growth and for more connected growth and for more environmentally conscious growth.
And I think we share that, which is interesting. It's nice to hear. Just wrapping up, are there any things you'd like to share that people should check out or?
Check out Junk Drawer for sure. Our Instagram is junkdrawer.collective, and then you can find the link in the bio to go to the newsletter and see the old issues, and we're always taking submissions. And we're hosting some events in the near future. Donate money to people. If you have money lying around, donate it to people who need it and who have projects that they are trying to put on.